The red lipstick on the mirror said I'd been abandoned, but the silence of the robbed house screamed betrayal. I'm Dorothy, 72 years old, a former clerk at the county recorder's office, and they underestimated my memory. They forgot who notarizes the deeds. I woke up with that strange feeling you get when the weather suddenly turns, you know? That heavy silence that hurts your ears. Normally, at 7 a.m., the house would already be full of noise. My son Robert's radio tuned to the morning news, my daughter-in-law Jessica banging the kitchen cabinet doors, the smell of strong coffee wafting down the hall. But today, nothing. Not even the hum of the refrigerator or the bark of the neighbor's dog seemed to penetrate the walls. I got out of bed with some difficulty, my joints complaining a bit about the dampness, and slipped on my cloth slippers. The first thing I noticed was my bedroom door, slightly ajar. I always closed it before bed. I pushed the wood open and headed for the hallway bathroom, still a bit groggy from sleep. That's when I flipped on the light and saw it. Written in my favorite lipstick, that deep wine color I saved for church or weddings. Mom, we've moved. Don't look for us. I read it once, twice, 3 times. The letters were shaky, as if written in a hurry. The D in moved dripped down a little, like a wax tear. I stood there, gripping the sink, trying to figure out if I was still dreaming. Robert, my only son, the boy I raised alone after my husband passed away, was gone. Just like that, without a goodbye, without a conversation. I left the bathroom and went to the living room. That's when the world spun, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. The room was empty, not tidy, but stripped bare. They'd taken the brown leather sofa where I watched my evening shows. They'd taken the big screen TV I'd paid for in 12 monthly installments. They'd even taken the Persian rug, an heirloom from my mother. All that was left were dust outlines on the hardwood floor, tracing the ghosts of furniture that once stood there. I ran, or tried to run, to the kitchen. The stove was gone. The stainless steel refrigerator, a gift for my 70th birthday, had vanished. The cabinets were open, gaping like hungry mouths, without a single plate or glass. They took everything. My God. They even took the old ceramic water crock that kept the water so cool. I went to the guest room, where they'd been sleeping ever since they lost their apartment and came to live with me, just for a few months. Months that had turned into 3 years. Empty. Not a single forgotten sock on the floor. Their smell was still there, that cloyingly sweet perfume of Jessica's mixed with my son's deodorant. But that was all that remained. I returned to the living room, my heart beating erratically, like a bird trapped in a cage. My legs gave out. I couldn't take it. I slid my back down the cold wall until I was sitting on the hard floor. I looked at that immense space, which now looked like an abandoned ballroom, and it hit me. I hadn't been robbed by street thugs, not by masked bandits. I was robbed by my own flesh and blood, by the boy I held in my arms, taught to walk, whose college tuition I paid with my hard-earned money from the records office, stamping papers and notarizing documents until my fingers were calloused. The pain came like a tidal wave. Not a physical pain, but a knife to the soul. How could they? How did they have the nerve to plan all this while I slept in the next room? They must have loaded the truck in the middle of the night, tiptoeing, laughing quietly about the old woman snoring. I felt like garbage, an old object you discard when it's no longer useful. They took the filling of my life and left me with the hollow shell of the house. And then I cried. I cried my heart out. I cried that ugly cry, sobbing, nose running, hugging my own knees. I cried for the ingratitude. I cried for the loneliness that was settling into that empty echo. I cried because I felt like the most stupid woman in the world for having trusted, for having opened my door, for having given Robert the PIN to my debit card for the month's groceries, for having believed Jessica when she'd say, "Oh, Dorothy, you're like a mother to me." I glanced at my wristwatch, the only valuable thing I had left because I never took it off. It was 7:15. I had started crying at 7, 10, 5 minutes. That's the time I gave myself. 5 minutes of self-pity. 5 minutes to mourn the son I thought I had. But when the second hand completed its circle, something happened. An old coldness, the same one I used when I had to reject a faulty deed at the office, began to creep up my spine. I wiped the tears with the back of my hand. The crying stopped abruptly, as if someone had turned off a faucet. I looked at the marks on the floor where the bookshelf used to be. They'd taken my late husband Albert's law books. They'd taken the encyclopedias, but they left the dust. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs, clearing out the sadness and making way for something else. Indignation. Rage. But not an explosive rage, the kind that makes you scream and break things. Not that there was anything left to break. It was an icy, calculating rage. Robert, I whispered to the empty room, my voice echoing spookily. You may have your father's eyes, but you didn't inherit his brains. I got up from the floor. My knees cracked, but I stood firm. I walked to my bedroom, the only room they hadn't dared to completely pillage, perhaps out of haste, or perhaps for fear I'd wake up. I opened my closet. My clothes were there. At least there was that. But I wasn't looking for clothes. I dragged out an old shoebox filled with old photos from the back of the closet. I removed the top layer of pictures. Robert as a baby, Robert at his graduation, our last Christmas. I tossed them aside without a second glance. In the box's false bottom, I lifted the cardboard flap. There lay a thick manila envelope, sealed with packing tape, and next to it, a black, hardcover notebook. I took the notebook and opened it. My notes. 35 years working at the county recorder's office taught me one thing. What isn't written down doesn't exist. But what is written down and signed, that has the power of law. I was always seen as Grandma Dorothy, the nice old lady who baked cornmeal cake and slipped her grandkids a few dollars. They thought I was going senile. Mom's getting forgetful, Robert would say to Jessica, laughing when I'd ask where I left my glasses. They thought I didn't pay attention to their whispered conversations in the corners, the strange phone calls, the bank statements that disappeared from the mailbox before I could see them. They thought I was just a helpless, retired old woman. I opened the manila envelope. The smell of old paper wafted up, and to me, it was the smell of victory. Inside was the original deed to the house, and stapled to it was a document I'd had Robert sign 5 years ago when he came to me begging for money to start a business that went bankrupt in 6 months. He signed it without reading, desperate for the cash, trusting that his mommy would never do anything to hurt him. It was a promissory note and, more importantly, a personal property agreement with very specific clauses about the furniture and appliances in the residence, all inventoried and notarized. I smoothed the paper with my wrinkled hand. They took the television, the sofa, the refrigerator. They took everything they thought had value, but they forgot that whoever holds the paper holds the power. They thought that by disappearing, I'd just stay here crying until I died of a broken heart or ended up in a nursing home. I walked back to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror at that phrase written in blood-red lipstick. Don't look for us. I let out a short, dry laugh. Oh, my boy, I'm not going to look for you, I said to my reflection, seeing a white-haired woman whose eyes were sparking like embers. I don't need to look. I know exactly where you'll have to go when the court officer knocks on the door of that apartment Jessica rented in her name, using me as a guarantor without my knowledge. Or did she think I don't get notifications on my cell phone? They didn't know. But I had a banking app that monitored every cent, every transaction. And I knew exactly which moving company had taken my furniture, because the company belonged to my neighbor Carol Gable's nephew, and I had jotted down the license plate of the truck that had been lurking on the street for days. I'm Dorothy. I've dealt with judges, lawyers, and con artists my whole life. I've seen families destroy each other over inheritances. I've seen brothers kill each other over a few feet of land. I know human greed like the back of my hand. And I had prepared myself for the day greed would knock on my door. I just never expected it to have my son's face. But now, the sadness was gone. What remained was strategy. I went to the empty kitchen. I opened the one drawer they hadn't taken, the junk drawer, where candles, string, and an old lipstick I no longer used were kept. I grabbed the lipstick, went back to the bathroom. Underneath the phrase, "Don't look for us," I wrote in my firm hand, the hand of someone who spent a lifetime filling out ledgers. "You have 24 hours to return everything, or the police will love to read what's in the safe." There was no safe, of course, but they didn't know that. Fear is a powerful weapon, and I knew how to wield fear better than anyone. I took my cell phone from my apron pocket and dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called in years but knew would be answered on the first ring. "Hello?" A gruff, masculine voice answered on the other end. "Mr. Peterson, it's Dorothy from the recorder's office. Remember that favor you've owed me since 1998. "Dorothy, of course, my dear. What happened?" "I need a judicial freeze and a writ of seizure. For today." I hung up the phone and looked at the empty house. The silence was no longer one of abandonment. It was the silence before the storm. They wanted a war? Fine. They had just declared war on the woman who taught the whole town how to read the fine print. I went to the living room window and opened the curtains, the only fabric items they'd left, perhaps because they were old. The sun poured in, illuminating the dust dancing in the air. I took a deep breath of that smell of a new beginning. They took my furniture, but they left my dignity. And with it, and with my black notebook, I was going to turn their lives into such a bureaucratic hell that they would wish they had never learned to write their own names. I smoothed my hair, brushed the dust off my dress, and went out to the porch. I sat in the wicker rocking chair that was out there, the only chair I had left. I rocked slowly, listening to the familiar creak, and began to plot my plan. The first step was already taken. The second would be even more painful for them. I smiled. Not a smile of happiness, but the smile of someone who knows they're holding the winning hand in a card game. "You may have moved out, Robert," I murmured to the wind, "but you can't move on from your mother, and you're about to learn that this mother collects her debts, with interest and penalties." The drafty wind whistled through the cracks in the living room window, making a high-pitched sound that seemed to mock me. I got up from the rocking chair on the porch, my legs a bit steadier than when I had collapsed in tears. That moment of weakness had passed. What was running through my veins now wasn't sadness. It was that cold adrenaline I used to feel when a complicated probate case landed on my desk, and I knew I had to untangle the knot left by incompetent people. I went back inside. The echo of my slippers on the hardwood floor sounded like a gavel in an empty courtroom. I needed to do an inventory, not a quick, desperate glance, but a technical inspection. I grabbed the black notebook and a Bic pen I found at the bottom of my purse. I started in the kitchen. It was the heart of the house, and it was where their cruelty hurt the most. I wrote down the first item on the lined paper: Whirlpool stainless steel refrigerator, 25 CRFT. I noted the purchase date from memory, June, 2 years ago. I still had the receipt filed away in my document folder. That red accordion file that stayed under my mattress and which, thanks to God and their ignorance, was still there. Microwave, stand mixer, ceramic cookware set. I muttered and wrote. I opened the pantry. They even took the rice. They took the new can of Maxwell House coffee I had just bought. A bitter taste filled my mouth. It wasn't hunger, it was disgust. Anyone who steals food from their mother has no hope of forgiveness, not in heaven or on earth. I had to improvise. I found some leftover coffee grounds in a forgotten glass jar at the back of the sink cabinet and boiled water in a dented little aluminum mug we used to use for the dog's food. The dog who died last year, poor thing, spared from seeing this shame. With no cups, I washed a cream cheese jar that was in the dish rack and strained the coffee right into it, using a paper napkin as a makeshift filter. I drank the strong, black liquid without sugar. The bitterness burned its way down. waking up every cell in my body that was still considering giving in to despair. Notebook in hand, I continued my rounds. Living room, 50-inch TV, reclining sofa, Persian rug. I stopped in front of the wall where the TV used to be. There were smudges on the paint, grease or black dust. I leaned in closer. Fingerprints. Robert always had sweaty hands, but this looked like truck grime, from a move done in a hurry, carelessly. I went to their room. It was swept clean, too clean. Jessica was lazy when it came to deep cleaning, but to cover her tracks, she had been efficient. But no one is perfect. I bent down with difficulty, my knees cracking loudly, to look under the baseboard near the outlet. There it was, a tiny crumpled piece of paper, an insignificant white ball to anyone else, but not to me. I picked it up and carefully unfolded it, as if it were an ancient papyrus. It was a credit card receipt, not mine, Jessica's. The North Star Gas and Go, diesel fuel, $150. 0. The date and time, yesterday at 11:45 p.m. I smiled. The North Star was on the edge of town, right by the highway heading for the coast. Diesel, I whispered. So they rented a big truck and headed toward the beach. Robert always talked about his dream of opening a little bar on the beach. He'd say working in an office was for slaves, a clear jab at me, who spent my life hunched over papers to make sure he had food on the table. It seemed he decided to make his dream come true with my assets. I went back to the living room and picked up my phone. I opened the banking app. My Social Security check was due tomorrow. Thank God I never gave him the password to my main account, only to a joint account we used for household expenses. I accessed the joint account. Balance, $0. 00. They'd cleaned out every last cent. But the statement? The statement is the biggest tattletale in human history. There was an ATM withdrawal made at a 24-hour convenience store at 2 a.m. The location of the withdrawal, a gas station in Clearwater. Bingo. I sat on the living room floor again, but not to cry this time. I sat like a general studying a war map. I had the destination, Clearwater. I had the proof of theft, the empty house, and the inventory of assets in my name. I had the signed promissory note, and now I had the financial trail. But I needed more. I needed to know exactly where they had parked that truck. A city, even a medium-sized coastal one, is still big enough for two rats to hide. That's when I looked out the window and saw Mrs. Gable sweeping the sidewalk across the street. Carol Gable, 68. A widow and the biggest gossip in the neighborhood. If a fly changed partners on our street, Carol knew who the lover was. I stood up, smoothed my rebellious white hair, and went outside. I crossed the street with an erect posture, no looking like a pitiful victim. The neighborhood couldn't know I'd been abandoned. They had to think I was in control. "Morning, Carol," I called out from her gate, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. She stopped her broom midair, her small eyes gleaming with curiosity. She must have seen the truck last night. "Well, morning, Dorothy," Carol said, shuffling over in her flip-flops. "It's been strangely quiet over at your place today. Saw a lot of commotion late last night. Did Robert move out?" She knew. Of course she knew. She was just testing the waters to see how much I'd tell. "He did, Carol," I said, leaning my arms on her gate with the casualness of someone discussing the price of tomatoes. "The boy decided to help a friend renovate his beach house. Took our furniture over there so we can replace everything here. I'm redecorating the whole house. You know how it is. New year, new life. I want everything modern." The lie rolled off my tongue easily. I worked at the recorder's office. I heard lies all day. I learned to tell my own as naturally as I breathed. Carol's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but envy spoke louder. "Redecorating everything. Wow, Dorothy, how fancy. But they took everything, didn't they?" I saw Jake's truck, Janice's nephew, pull up there. It was almost midnight. Thought it was a bit rude, all that noise. Jake, Janice's nephew. Oh, it was Jake. I exclaimed as if confirming a trivial detail. Such a good, helpful boy, but I seem to have lost his number. Carol, do you have it? I need to ask him to pick up a few boxes we left behind. Carol, eager to be part of the news, quickly pulled her phone out of her bra. Sure do. Hang on. He does hauling for everyone around here. She recited the number, and I jotted it down on my hand with the Bic pen. Thanks, neighbor. I'll have you over for coffee when my new imported china cups arrive. I walked back home, feeling my heart beat with a rhythm of triumph. I had the driver's name. I went inside and closed the door. The silence of the empty house no longer scared me. Now it was my ally. It was the silence where I could think. For years, I had been Dorothy, the old lady who knitted, who watched Sunday sermons on TV, who baked orange cake for afternoon coffee. Robert and Jessica looked at me and saw an old piece of furniture, something that was just there to serve and take up space. They saw my trembling hands as I held a teacup and assumed my mind trembled along with them. They forgot who I was before I was Robert's mother. I was the woman who uncovered the fraud in the city's land deed back in 1985. I was the woman who prevented an illiterate widow from being swindled by her greedy stepchildren by refusing to notarize a forged signature that looked perfect to everyone else but me. I knew the pressure of a pen on paper. I knew the hesitation of a liar. I spent 35 years dealing with American bureaucracy. I know that a piece of paper is worth more than 1,000 words, and that a stamp in the right place can stop a bulldozer. They thought I was fragile because I loved them. That was their mistake. They confused love with weakness, kindness with stupidity. I looked at my hands. The skin was thin, covered in age spots, the blue veins prominent. But beneath that skin, the bones were hard. They were the bones of someone who had endured widowhood, double shifts, and raising an ungrateful son without ever begging for a handout. I dialed the number for this Jake. Hello, Jake's hauling. A young voice answered with radio noise in the background. Good morning, Jake. This is Mrs. Dorothy from the house where you did the move for Robert last night. There was a silence on the other end. The pause of someone who knows they did something wrong, or at least strange, in the dead of night. Oh, hi, Mrs. Dorothy. Everything okay? Robert said you were sleeping so we wouldn't wake you. Yes, I was. But Jake, my son is so scatterbrained. He forgot the key to the new place's gate here with me. I need to FedEx it to him urgently, otherwise they can't get in, right? He gave me the address in a rush, and I didn't write down the house number. Just the street in Clearwater. Can you confirm it for me? It was a risky move. If Robert had told him not to say anything, I'd lose my chance. But Robert was arrogant. He thought I wouldn't even know who did the move. He wouldn't have warned the driver about anything because, in his mind, I was harmless. Oh, sure, Mrs. Dorothy. It's on Fisherman's Cove, number 280 in the Sandkey neighborhood. Blue-walled house. Fisherman's Cove, 280. Thank you, son. God bless you. I hung up. I wrote the address in the notebook right below the list of stolen furniture. Clearwater, Sandkey, Fisherman's Cove. Now I had the target. All that was left was the heavy artillery. The phone rang in my hand, making me jump. It was Mr. Peterson. I took a deep breath, composed my voice into one of authority, and answered. Dorothy. His voice was serious. I've already filed the motion for an injunction. I got an emergency hearing with Judge Miller. Remember her? The one who was an intern at our office. I remember. A serious girl. Very competent. Well, she's a judge now. When she saw your name in the description of the case, Dorothy, she was furious. Elder abuse statutes, embezzlement, financial abuse. The order will be out in an hour. The freeze on their bank accounts has already been requested from the Federal Reserve. If they try to use a card to buy a popsicle on the beach, it'll be declined. I felt a warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't happiness, it was justice. Justice has a metallic, cold, and satisfying taste. And the writ of seizure, Peterson. That takes a bit longer. needs a court officer. But with the address you're going to give me, you do have an address, don't you? I do. 280 Fisherman's Cove, Clearwater. You're a devil, Dorothy. He laughed with respect. I'll send it to the officer down there. But listen, are you sure you want to do this? He's your son. This will involve the police, criminal charges. I looked at the empty living room, at the spot where my husband's armchair used to be, which they took without even a nod to his memory. I remembered the lipstick on the mirror. Don't look for us. They hadn't treated me like a mother. They treated me like disposable baggage. Peterson, my voice came out firm, without a tremor. You make your bed, you lie in it. And if my son has become a thief, then it's his mother's job to turn him over to the police before he robs the neighbors. Go ahead. I want everything back, and I want them to learn that karma exists, and it walks hand in hand with the penal code. All right then, keep me posted. I hung up. I went to the guest room, which was now just an empty room. I opened the window and let the sun in. The cloying scent of Jessica's perfume was fading, replaced by the smell of salt air the wind carried from afar. Or maybe that was just my imagination. I had 24 hours, I'd said to the mirror, but they didn't even have that long anymore. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, and opened the notebook again. I began to plot the next phase. Freezing the money was the beginning. Recovering the furniture was the middle. But the end had to be educational. I didn't just want my things back, I wanted my dignity. And for that, I needed to look them in the face one last time, not as a weeping mother, but as a relentless creditor. I had to go to Clearwater. My joints ached just thinking about the bus ride. 3 hours rattling along with this spine that had seen better days. But rage is a potent fuel. It lubricates the joints and numbs the pain. I stood up, determined. I went to my room and opened my underwear drawer. Deep inside, rolled up in an old sock, was a wad of cash, emergency money I kept for medical bills. It was $2. Robert never knew about this hiding spot because he was disgusted by the thought of touching my compression socks. I counted the bills. It was enough for the bus ticket, a taxi, and to hire 2 strong helpers there in the city, in case the court officer needed extra muscle to carry my refrigerator back. I changed my clothes, taking off the faded house dress and putting on my beige linen suit, the one I wore at my retirement party. I put on a string of faux pearls that looked real. I applied a discreet pink lipstick and combed my hair back, securing it in a firm bun. I looked at myself in the bedroom mirror. The woman looking back didn't look 72. She looked like an ancient rock, sculpted by time but unbreakable. I grabbed my purse, the black notebook, the house documents, and my key. On my way out, I stopped by the bathroom one last time. Their message was still there, mine right below it. I picked up the wine-colored lipstick again and wrote one last line at the very bottom. P.S. The court officer gets there before the pizza. I left the house and locked the door with 2 full turns. The sun was high and burned my skin, but I didn't feel the heat. I only felt the weight of my own history pushing me forward. I walked to the bus stop. My neighbor Carol was at her window watching me. I nodded to her, head held high. "Going out for a stroll, Dorothy?" she yelled. "I am, Carol," I replied, my voice clear in the quiet street. "Going to visit the coast. They say justice is slow but sure. I've decided that today it won't even be slow." The bus turned the corner. I climbed the steps, holding tightly to the handrail. I sat in a priority seat and placed my purse on my lap, hugging it like a shield. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, ma'am?" "Everything's wonderful, son," I replied, looking at the road ahead. "Couldn't be better." As the bus pulled away, I imagined Jessica's face trying to use the card at the supermarket to buy shrimp with my money, only to see the message, "Transaction declined." I imagined Robert calling the bank manager, sweating bullets. The tables had turned, And they had no idea that the old lady, the mother, the grandma, was coming for them with the force of a bureaucratic tsunami. I closed my eyes and rested. I would need my energy for the show I was about to put on at Fisherman's Cove. The heat in Clearwater wasn't the pleasant autumn sun that used to warm my porch. It was a damp, sticky swelter that made your clothes cling to your body. I got off the bus at the station with my legs swollen from the trip, but my head was so light it felt like it was floating. It was 2 p.m. The smell of salt air mixed with bus exhaust and fried food from a boardwalk stand filled my nostrils. For many, it was the smell of vacation. For me, that day, it was the smell of the battlefield. I didn't go straight to the house. Strategy requires patience, and patience is a virtue you master after 60 when you're not in a hurry for much of anything, except justice. I stopped at a corner bakery, ordered a bottle of water and a cheese Danish that looked like it had been in the display case since breakfast. While I ate, I called the number Mr. Peterson had texted me. "Officer Davies, this is Dorothy. I'm in town. Do you have the warrant?" The voice on the other end was young, hurried, but professional. "Mrs. Dorothy?" "Yes. I have the injunction and the writ of seizure right here. The judge marked it as top priority. Where are you? I can meet you near the location in half an hour." "Perfect. I'll be on the corner of Fisherman's Cove. But, Officer Davies, bring police backup. My son isn't violent, but desperation does ugly things to people's minds." I hung up and finished my rubbery Danish. I needed to hire some muscle. I looked across the street where two sturdy young men were unloading crates of beer at a bar. I crossed the street without hesitation. I negotiated with them right there, $100 each, just to carry furniture, cash on the spot. They agreed immediately, amused by the old lady in pearls hiring day laborers in the middle of the afternoon. I hailed a cab with my 2 new employees and asked to be dropped off at the corner of Fisherman's Cove. The Sandkey neighborhood was nice, wide streets, vacation homes with green lawns, and there it was, number 280. A single-story house, low blue wall, with a large porch out front. And on the porch, like a stolen trophy, was my wicker rocking chair, the one I thought they'd left for me. But it turned out they'd just taken its twin. Their audacity was so great they didn't even bother to hide. I asked the men to wait on the corner and walked alone along the opposite sidewalk, hiding behind a leafy tree. I needed to see. I needed to be sure their life was proceeding as normal while mine had been turned upside down. Through the living room window, which was wide open to let the breeze in, I saw Jessica. She was in a bikini and a sarong, holding a glass of what looked like white wine, my white wine that I kept in the cellar for special occasions. She was laughing as she talked on the phone, pacing back and forth on my Persian rug. Robert appeared moments later, wearing only swim trunks, drying his hair with a towel. He turned on my giant television. The scene looked like a margarine commercial, if the margarine were made of theft and betrayal. They were celebrating their freedom, celebrating the money they hadn't worked for, celebrating their scam on the old lady. My heart tightened, but not with longing. It tightened with disgust. How could I have raised someone so empty? But I took a deep breath. The show was about to begin. Just then, a delivery guy on a moped pulled up to the gate and honked. Robert came out smiling, wallet in hand. I couldn't hear the exact dialogue, but body language speaks louder than any shout. Robert handed over a card. The delivery guy inserted it into his machine. Silence. The delivery guy shook his head. Robert frowned, took the card back, wiped the chip on his shorts, and handed it over again. Another try. Another decline. I smiled from behind the tree. Mr. Peterson's judicial freeze was as precise as a scalpel. Jessica came out onto the porch, gesticulating. She ran back inside and returned with another card. Hers. The delivery guy tried it. Nothing. By this point, the delivery guy was taking off his helmet. Impatient, sweating in the sun. Robert started waving his hands, pointing at his phone, probably trying to show he had a balance in his banking app. But a frozen balance is the same as a mirage in the desert. You can see it, but you can't drink it. The argument heated up. The delivery guy took the pizza, or whatever it was, and put it back in the delivery box on his moped. He started it up and drove away, leaving the two of them looking foolish at the gate of their rented house. It was time. I saw a discreet white car with the court seal on the door turn the corner. Right behind it, a police cruiser, its lights off but its presence felt. Officer Davies, a tall young man with glasses, got out of the car with a folder in his hand. I signaled to the two men I had hired. They approached, curious. "What's this, ma'am? A police raid?" one of them asked. "It's the repossession of my dignity, son. Just stay sharp. When I give the word, you go in and get everything on the list." The court officers stopped at the gate. Robert and Jessica were still outside, arguing with each other, probably blaming the bank or the internet for the card errors. When they saw the officer and the police, they froze. The color drained from Jessica's face so fast it was like someone had flipped a switch. "Mr. Robert Miller, Ms. Jessica Souza?" the officer asked, his voice firm, resting his folder on the low gate. "That's me. What's wrong? Did something happen to my mother?" Robert asked. His hypocrisy made me want to vomit. He was using my name as a shield, feigning concern. "It's not a death notification, sir. It's a writ of seizure and a summons for a civil and criminal lawsuit." "A writ of seizure?" Jessica's voice was high-pitched, hysterical. "For what?" "We just moved in. This is a mistake. This address is new. The warrant pertains to the movable assets listed in this petition, which were removed from the residence of Mrs. Dorothy Miller as of yesterday. The order includes, but is not limited to, appliances, furniture, art, and household utensils. I also have here a notification of the complete freeze of all bank accounts belonging to both defendants up to the limit of the executed debt and moral damages." Robert stumbled back a step, tripping over his own flip-flop. "My mom sued us, but she wouldn't do that. She's old. She doesn't even know how to deal with lawyers." "The plaintiff is legally represented and equipped with documentary evidence, including a signed promissory note and a notarized inventory," the officer replied impassively, opening the unlocked gate. "Please allow us entry. The police are here to ensure the order is carried out. If there is any resistance, I will be forced to request you be taken to the station for obstruction." That was my cue. I stepped out from behind the tree, adjusted my pearl necklace, smoothed my linen suit, and walked down the middle of the street. The sun beat down on my face, but I didn't blink. My steps on the hot asphalt were firm. The two of them saw me when I was about 30 feet from the gate. "Mom," Robert whispered. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. His eyes darted from me to the officer, from the officer to the police, trying to connect the dots his brain refused to accept. "Dorothy," Jessica put a hand to her mouth. I stopped beside the court officer. I didn't look at them right away. I looked at the house. "Nice house, Robert," I said in a tone of casual conversation. "Too bad it's furnished with someone else's sweat." "Mom, what is this? You brought the police? Have you gone crazy?" Robert tried to square up to me, using that tone of voice he used when he wanted to intimidate me at home. "We just borrowed the stuff. We were going to bring it back. You know we were—" Silence. My voice came out in a tone I hadn't used since he was 12 and broke the neighbor's window. It wasn't a shout, it was a command. "You didn't borrow, you stole. You took advantage of me while I was sleeping to plunder my life. You thought I was a senile old woman who would just cry in a corner until I starved to death." "But Dorothy," Jessica tried to intervene with a tearful voice, "we were going to ask you to live with us here. It was a surprise. We wanted to make a beautiful room for you with a view of the ocean." I let out a short, dry laugh. "A surprise?" "The surprise was the message on the mirror in my lipstick, Jessica. Don't look for us, remember? My memory is excellent, dear. Better than yours, apparently." I turned to Officer Davies. "You may begin, officer. I have the list here for you to check against." The officer nodded to the policeman who stepped onto the porch. Robert tried to block their way in a final act of masculine stupidity. "Nobody's coming in here. This house is rented in my name. You can't just violate a private residence. A court order nullifies that right when there is evidence of a crime or a search warrant, sir, one of the officers explained, placing a hand lightly on his holster in a silent warning. Step aside. They went in, and I followed right behind them, like the rightful owner inspecting her property. The living room was a mess, open boxes, clothes strewn about, but there were my things. My brown sofa looked out of place in that modern white room. My TV was on, tuned to a music video channel. My Persian rug had a sand stain in one corner. I felt a pang of pain seeing my things so disrespected, but I swallowed my tears. This was no place for emotion. It was a place for execution. "You can come in, boys," I called out to the street. My 2 hired hands entered, strong as bulls. "You can start with the television and the sofa. Watch the doorframe." Jessica burst into loud sobs, sinking to the floor just as I had done hours before. But her tears were of fear, not sadness. They were the tears of someone who's been caught. "Robert, do something. They're going to take everything. We'll have nowhere to sleep. They froze our money. Robert, how are we going to pay the rent?" Robert was leaning against the wall, pale, sweating profusely. He looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. "You can't do this, Mom. I'm your son." I walked over to him. I stood very close, smelling the beer on his breath. I looked deep into those brown eyes that I once loved more than my own life. "Exactly. Because you are my son, Robert. I have an obligation to teach you the lesson your father should have taught you if he were alive. I raised you with love, gave you an education, gave you a home, and you repaid me by leaving me in an empty mausoleum." I took the black notebook from my purse and opened it to the page where I'd jotted down the postscript to the mirror message. "I warned you, son. The court officer gets there before the pizza." He looked at the notebook, confused. "But how did you find us so fast? How did you know about the bank? How?" "I was a clerk at the county recorder's office for 35 years, Robert. I know how to find people who don't want to be found, and I know that the devil is in the details." "You signed a digital lease using an old email that was still logged into my old tablet. You filled up the truck with Jessica's card at a gas station that sends electronic receipts to a loyalty account linked to my phone number because I signed her up for it years ago to get points. You're an amateur, my son, and crime doesn't forgive amateurs." The movers passed by us carrying the 50-inch television. The empty space on the beach house's entertainment center looked like a mouth with a missing tooth. Officer Davies approached with a clipboard. "Mrs. Dorothy, we've located the jewelry listed in Appendix 3 in the back room, and also a sum of cash, about $5,000, inside a shoebox." "Cash?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at Jessica. "Probably withdrawn from my joint account before the freeze." "Seize it all, officer. Deduct it from the debt." Jessica let out a shriek. "That money was to pay for the moving truck. Jake is going to come looking for it." "Jake is a good boy," I replied calmly. "I've already spoken with him on the phone. He'll be very disappointed to learn you can't pay the rest of the fare, but don't worry. I'll pay his fee to bring my things back home. As for the trip here, well, that's your problem." The house was being emptied. What had taken them an entire night to steal was being recovered in an hour of judicial efficiency. With every item that went out the door, I saw Robert's pride crumble a little more. He was no longer the arrogant man who thought he could pull a fast one on his mother. He was a scared little boy watching his toys being taken away. When the movers took the stainless steel refrigerator, there was a moment of tension. It was heavy, difficult to get through the door. "Be careful not to scratch it," I yelled. "That fridge cost me 10 months of savings." Robert finally pushed himself off the wall. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat. "Mom, please, at least leave the stove. How are we supposed to eat?" I looked at the 4-burner stove, my little warrior stove that had made so many Sunday dinners for him and his friends. I looked at Jessica, sobbing in the corner. I looked at the opulence of the beach house they had rented, thinking they would live like kings at my expense. I remembered my empty kitchen, the water I had to boil in the dog's old food mug, the coffee strained through a napkin. You have money to rent a house with a pool facing the ocean, Robert. I'm sure you can afford a camping stove. Or, I pointed to the porch. There's a barbecue grill out there. Improvise. That's what I had to do this morning. I turned my back and went out to the porch to supervise the loading of the truck that Jake had brought. Yes, I had called Jake himself as soon as I confirmed the address, offering him double to make the return trip. He, unaware of the whole mess, had happily accepted the return fare. Outside, the neighbors were starting to appear at their windows. The public shaming was complete. Police, court officer, moving truck. I sat down in the wicker chair, which was already on the sidewalk waiting to be loaded. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange. I took off the shoes that were pinching my swollen feet and breathed in the sea air. They were destroyed in there. Without furniture, without money, without cards, and worst of all, without the certainty that their mother would be there to clean up their mess. Because this time, their mother was the one holding the broom, and I was sweeping everything out. Officer Davies came over to me with a shy smile. "Mrs. Dorothy, you're incredible. I've never seen such a swift and clean execution. Thank you, son. When you lose the fear of being alone, you gain a strength you never knew you had." I looked at the door of the house. Robert appeared in the doorway, desolate. "And now, Mom? What do we do?" I faced my son, not with hatred, but with a necessary pedagogical coldness. "Now? Now you're going to learn to live with what's yours, which by my current calculation is absolutely nothing. Grow up." The truck honked. It was ready. I stood up, put my shoes on, and walked to the truck's cab. I would ride back with them, sitting high on the passenger seat, guiding my conquered possessions back home. The battle was won, but the war, the war of rebuilding my heart, that was just beginning. But now I knew I had the weapons to fight. The ride back in Jake's truck was quiet, but my head was buzzing. The diesel engine roared on the highway, and I watched the streetlights fly by like the days of my life I had wasted coddling ungrateful people. Jake, poor guy, didn't know what to do with himself. He'd occasionally glance at me out of the corner of his eye, with that mix of respect and fear that men get when they realize an old woman is not just a piece of decor. We arrived on my street late at night. The truck parked and made that loud air brake sound that woke up the whole neighborhood again. Carol, of course, was at her window in under 3 seconds. This time I didn't hide. I climbed down from the cab with the driver's help, straightened my wrinkled linen suit, and opened the gate. "You can start unloading, boys," I ordered, my voice hoarse with fatigue but firm. Watching my furniture return home was a strange sensation. The sofa came in, the refrigerator went back to its corner, the TV was placed on its stand. It was like a movie playing in reverse. But as I watched my things return to their places, I realized the house would never be the same. These objects now carried a heavy history. The refrigerator wasn't just where I kept the milk anymore. It was evidence of a crime. When Jake and his helpers left, with their payment in their pockets and a generous tip I took from my emergency stash, I locked the door. The silence returned, but now it wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of my sovereignty. I made myself a chamomile tea in my newly refurnished kitchen. The gas on the stove worked perfectly. I sat in my armchair, took a deep breath, and waited. I knew the phone would ring. Desperation has a certain rhythm, and it doesn't usually take long. And sure enough, the cell phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was Robert. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again and again. On the 4th try, I answered. "Hello," I said calmly, as if answering a customer satisfaction survey. "Mom, for the love of God." Robert's voice was choked, full of wind noise in the background. "We're at the bus station in Clearwater. Jessica's feeling sick. We don't have a single cent, Mom. The card won't even work to buy a bottle of water. I told you about the freeze, Robert. Mr. Peterson is very efficient. But how are we supposed to get back? The truck left. You took everything. We got evicted from the rental because the owner showed up screaming that the rent payment didn't go through and the police were at the door. Mom, we're on the street. I took a sip of my tea. It was warm, going down smoothly. Funny, son. This morning, when I woke up and saw that message on the mirror, I felt like I was on the street too. Inside my own house, but on the street. It's a bad feeling, isn't it? That helplessness. Mom, stop it. This is serious. Send us a Zelle so we can at least get a bus ticket. Robert, you are 45 years old. You have 2 arms and 2 legs. Jessica is healthy enough to lift weights at the gym. Figure it out. Mommy has retired from the ATM business. I hung up. I blocked his number for an hour. I needed to take my shower in peace. I went to the bathroom. The hot water washed away the sweat of the journey, the dust of the road, and the smell of that damned beach house. I put on my flannel pajamas, the most comfortable ones I had. When I came out of the bathroom, I looked at the mirror. The lipstick was still there. My answers, too. I took a cloth with some rubbing alcohol and wiped it all away. The glass was clean. I would buy a new mirror tomorrow. This one had seen too much misery. I slept like a log. A clear conscience is the best pillow, and mine was sparkling. The next morning, I woke up to banging on my front gate. Frantic, desperate banging. I looked at the clock. 7 a.m. The same time I had discovered the robbery the day before. The circle was closing. I got up slowly, put on my glasses, and went to the living room window. There they were, Robert and Jessica, wearing the same clothes as yesterday. Robert in his beach shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt. Jessica in her beach cover-up with a sarong wrapped around her shoulders, shivering from cold or nerves. Her hair, always so perfectly styled, was a rat's nest. They must have hitched a ride overnight or sold their phones to pay for the tickets, because they looked like 2 refugees. They saw me at the window and started yelling. "Dorothy, open up!" Jessica shouted, devoid of her usual polished demeanor. "We need to come in. We need a shower." "Mom, open this gate. The key isn't working. Did you change the locks?" Robert rattled the bars. I walked out the front door and onto the porch. I didn't go down to the gate. I stayed up there, on my pedestal of stained concrete. "Good morning," I said, loud enough for Carol to hear from her house. "Mom, stop the drama. Just open up. We're tired, we're hungry. We were humiliated in that town." Robert was red-faced, the veins in his neck bulging. "The key doesn't work, Robert, because this is no longer Mom and Son's house. This is Dorothy Miller's house. And in Dorothy Miller's house, thieves don't get in, even if they share my last name." Jessica threw herself onto the sidewalk in a dramatic display that would make any soap opera actress envious. "You have no heart. You're so vindictive. What we did was wrong, okay, we admit it. But to leave us destitute, to freeze everything, that's just cruel." I descended the porch steps slowly, holding the railing. I approached the gate, but kept the iron bars between us. I pulled a manila envelope from my robe pocket, not the one with the deed, but a new one that a courier from Mr. Peterson's office had left in my mailbox early that morning, as I had requested the night before. I passed the envelope through the bars. Robert took it with trembling hands. "What's this?" "That, my son, is reality knocking on your door." I crossed my arms. "Inside there is a copy of the execution of the debt from that loan 5 years ago. With interest and inflation adjustments, the total is now over $100. And there's also the police report I filed electronically last night for felony theft and breach of trust, with an elder abuse enhancement." Robert opened the papers, and his eyes nearly popped out of his head. He read the first few lines and turned pale. "Jail? Mom, you're trying to send me to jail?" "I'm not trying to do anything, Robert. The law is. I just told the detective the truth, that I woke up, my house was stripped bare, and my son had vanished. That's a crime, and crimes have consequences. Vanessa snatched the papers from his hand. You can't arrest him. If he goes to jail, who will take care of me? Who will work? I let out a laugh that came from deep in my belly. Work? Vanessa, my dear, Robert hasn't really worked in 3 years. He lives off my Social Security checks and the odd jobs he picks up to keep up appearances. And you, when was the last time you washed a dish without complaining it would ruin your nails? They fell silent. The shock was finally setting in. They thought I was just having an old lady's tantrum. They thought I'd scare them a bit and then open the gate, make them coffee, and forgive them. Like I always did. They hadn't counted on the professional Dorothy. Listen closely, I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm tone. You have 2 options now. The first is to continue making a scene here at my gate. The police were here yesterday. They know the way. I can call them again. And you can explain to the sergeant why you're trying to break into the home of the victim you just robbed. Robert swallowed hard. He glanced around, seeing that the neighbors were all out on the street now, pretending to sweep their walks or walk their dogs. Public shame is a powerful weapon against people who live on appearances. And the second option? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The second option is you leave now. The freeze on your accounts will remain until every cent you spent on the truck, the gas, and your little party yesterday is returned to my account. The criminal charges. Well, we can negotiate that later depending on your behavior. If I hear that you've come near my house or tried to take out any debt in my name again, I will not drop the complaint. And then, Robert, you'll be seeing the world through bars. But where are we supposed to go, Dorothy? Jessica whimpered, this time with real fear. We have nowhere to go. Doesn't Jessica have parents out in the country? I asked, remembering the few times she'd spoken of the humble family she despised. And you, Robert, remember that friend you used to say was like a brother? The one you were always buying rounds of beers for with my money? Go ask him for shelter. Let's see how much his friendship is worth when your wallet is empty. Robert looked at the envelope in his hand, then at me. For the first time in his life, I saw in his eyes not a spoiled boy, but a man defeated by his own arrogance. He realized the well had run dry, that the old lady had turned off the tap and put a steel padlock on it. You never loved me, he spat the words, trying to wound me one last time. That hurt. It hurt like a knife, but I didn't bleed in front of him. I had already cried my 5 minutes the day before. My tear quota for him was exhausted. I loved you so much, Robert, that I ruined you. My voice cracked, but I quickly regained my composure. I loved you so much that I protected you from everything, even from the consequences of your own stupidity. But loving also means teaching someone how to live. And now, at 72, I am giving you the most important lesson of your life. No one is obligated to support a parasite, not even a mother. I turned my back on them. Get off my sidewalk, now. I walked back to the porch without looking back. I heard Jessica's furious whispers as she argued with him. I heard the sound of their flip-flops shuffling away on the asphalt. I waited until I heard the silence again. When I turned around, the street was empty. They were gone. I went inside and closed the door. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood and let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. My legs were shaking a little. Confronting your own child goes against nature. It's like fighting a part of your own body. But sometimes, when a limb gets gangrene, you have to amputate it to save the rest of the body. I went to the bookshelf and picked up the photo of my late husband, Albert. Well, Al, I whispered to the frame. The boy got your stubbornness but forgot your character. I had to handle it. I looked around the room. Everything was there. My furniture, my memories, my life built with so much sweat. But the air was different. It was lighter. I was no longer the pitiful widow living with her son and his lazy wife. I was no longer the grandma who served coffee and swallowed insults. I went to my little office, a corner of the living room I used for sewing, but which would now go back to being my real office. I opened the black notebook, crossed off recover furniture. I crossed off freeze accounts. There was a blank line left at the bottom of the page. I picked up the pen and wrote, "Rebuild Dorothy." The phone rang again. It was Mr. Peterson. "Dorothy, the court officer called me. Said it was the most beautiful execution he's seen in his 20-year career." "So? Did they show up?" "They showed up, Peterson, and they're already gone." "And how are you?" "I feel like someone who's taken off a tight pair of shoes after walking all day. My friend, it hurts. There are blisters. But what a relief." Peterson laughed. "Are you made of iron, woman?" "Not iron, no. Peterson, iron rusts. I'm made of law, and the law doesn't get tired." I hung up the phone and looked out the window. The sun was shining brightly, illuminating the dust dancing in the air. The dust was the only thing left from yesterday, and even it seemed to shine brighter today. I had gotten my things back, but I had recovered something far more valuable: respect. Their respect, born of fear, and my own respect, born of courage. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. This time I used the new grounds Jake had bought for me at the bakery. The aroma filled the house, chasing away any lingering scent of Jessica's cheap perfume. As the water boiled, I thought about the future. I was 72. Statistically, I had another 15 or 20 years ahead of me, and I wasn't going to spend another minute of them being anyone's doormat. The doorbell rang. This time, it wasn't a desperate banging. It was the gentle chime of a visitor. I looked through the peephole. It was Carol, holding a dish covered with a tea towel. I opened the door. "Hi, neighbor," Carol said with a curious, sheepish grin. "I saw the commotion. Brought you some cornmeal cake to calm the nerves. And to find out if everything's okay." I smiled. A genuine smile. "Come in, Carol. The coffee's just brewed, and I have a story to tell you that's better than any primetime soap opera." I made way for her. Life went on, and for the first time in years, I was the one writing the script. The door closed, leaving the world outside. Inside, justice had been served, and the coffee was fresh. It's a shame that for some people, reality only hits when the bill arrives and the card is declined. The smell of cornmeal cake with a hint of anise filled the living room, mingling with the aroma of the fresh coffee I had just brewed. Sitting on my brown sofa, the very one that had traveled to the coast and back, I watched Carol cut a generous slice. Steam rose from the plate, dancing in the morning light that streamed through the window. For the first time in 3 years, the light felt cleaner, without the heavy shadow of worry or the specter of someone tiptoeing around so as not to wake me. "So, you really sent the court officer down there at lunchtime?" Carol asked, her eyes shining brighter than the varnish on my coffee table. She was savoring the information more than the cake itself. "Pizza time, Carol," I corrected, sipping coffee from the porcelain cup I had rescued intact. "Justice has to have good timing, my friend. Arrive too early, there's no audience. Arrive too late, the crook has already fled. He arrived at the exact moment their hunger kicked in and their card was declined." Carol let out a laugh that sent the pigeons on the power line scattering outside. "Dorothy, you're dangerous. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. Janice said her nephew Jake told her you looked like a general on top of that truck. Said he'd never seen a lady with so much authority." "He should call me ma'am," I replied with a wry smile. "I'm a woman who got tired of being a doormat. You know, Carol, the problem with doormats is that they get used to the dust. We think it's our job to absorb everyone else's dirt, but there comes a time when we need to be the broom." The following week was a honeymoon with myself. I rediscovered the pleasure of leaving a book on the table and finding it on the exact same page the next day. I rediscovered that the milk in the fridge lasts for 3 days, not 3 hours. I rediscovered that I could watch my evening news without hearing idiotic political commentary from a 45-year-old man who doesn't even pay his own cell phone bill. My house, once a hostel of ingratitude, became my sanctuary. But don't think I was lonely. The news of my rescue operation spread faster than gossip at a wake. Suddenly, Grandma Dorothy became Dorothy Esky. It all started with Mrs. Lords from down the street. She showed up at my gate 3 days after the incident, holding a crumpled piece of paper with that tear-stained look I knew so well. "Dorothy, I heard you understand these legal matters," she stammered. "My grandson wants me to sign this so he can finance a motorcycle. He said it's just a formality." I took the paper. My eagle eyes, trained by decades of fine print, scanned the text. It was no motorcycle cosign. It was a quitclaim deed for her house. The kid was trying to get the house in his name before the old woman was even cold. I felt that cold fire rise up my spine, the same one I felt when I read the message on the mirror. "Lords, come in. Let's have some coffee, and bring your pen. We're going to cross this paper out in a way that not even the Pope could validate." That afternoon, I explained to Lords, point by point, how her grandson was trying to scam her. We tore up the paper together. The look of empowerment in her eyes when she called her grandson and said, "I'm not signing it, and don't bother coming over today," was the best payment I could have received. And just like that, without meaning to, my porch turned into an informal consulting office for the elderly. People came with abusive loan contracts, questions about wills, wanting to know if they could disinherit a lazy nephew. And I, with my black notebook and my 35 years of experience stamping out chicanery, would advise them, "Don't sign this. This needs a lawyer. This is a crime. Call the police." I wasn't just protecting their assets. I was returning the dignity their own families were trying to steal. I discovered my mission hadn't ended when I retired. In fact, it had just moved to a different desk. As for Robert and Jessica, life is a cruel but effective teacher. For the first month, their silence was total, a product of wounded pride. But necessity is an animal that bites at pride until it bleeds. I heard through Carol, who has informants in every social and geographical stratum of the city, that they were living in a small back room at the house of a distant aunt of Jessica's, on the outskirts of the next town over. The aunt, a stern, church-going woman, imposed rules. No sleeping in until noon, no drinking, and everyone had to contribute. Robert, the man with a degree in doing nothing, had to get a job. And it wasn't in an air-conditioned office. It was at a building supply store, hauling bags of cement and working the counter. Mr. Peterson kept me updated. Every month, like clockwork, 30% of his minimum wage salary was garnished and deposited into my court-ordered account to pay down the debt. It was a pittance. It would take 200 years to pay back what he stole and what he owed me. But it wasn't about the money, it was about the symbolism. Every time he looked at his pay stub and saw the deduction, judicial levy, plaintiff, Dorothy Miller, he would remember me. He would remember that his mother was not to be trifled with. And Jessica? Well, Jessica discovered that gel nails don't hold up to a washboard. She started cleaning houses and selling cosmetics door to door. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, about 3 months after the Dorothy Revolution, the mailman rang. It was a certified letter. The sender was Robert. The handwriting on the envelope wasn't the shaky, hurried script from the mirror. It was a firm but humble hand. I sat in my armchair, put on my glasses, and opened it. There was no request for money, no emotional blackmail. "Mom, the cement is heavy. My back hurts every day. The boss yells at me if I'm 5 minutes late. Jessica cries every night because the money barely covers the rent for our room. Yesterday, while loading a truck, I remembered you coming home from the office with your fingers stained with ink and your feet swollen, and you would still go make dinner. I never asked if your back hurt. I only asked what was for dinner. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I know I lost that right. I'm writing because today, for the first time, I bought a bag of coffee with money I earned from my own sweat. And when I smelled it, I remembered your kitchen. You were right. The court officer got there before the pizza, but the shame is here to stay. I'm sorry. Robert. I read the letter twice. I didn't cry. The time for tears had passed. But I felt a knot loosen in my chest. It wasn't full forgiveness. Forgiveness is a slow, bureaucratic process, like adverse possession. But it was the beginning of an armistice. I took the letter and placed it in my shoebox, along with the old photos and the deed to the house. He was learning. Pain teaches what love spoils. I had to be the villain in his story so that he could become the hero of his own life, or at least a decent supporting character. I folded the paper and went to the hallway mirror, the new one I'd bought to replace the scene of the crime. I looked at the woman reflected there. Her white hair was impeccable. Her wrinkles told stories of laughter and tears, but mostly of survival. I was no longer just Robert's mother. I was Dorothy, the woman who took her own life back. Well, Dorothy, I said to my reflection, you did a good job. The boy is growing up. Late, but he's getting there. The next day, I went to the bank. Not to check balances or statements, but to talk to the investment manager. Mrs. Miller. He greeted me with that smile reserved for clients with liquidity. How can I help you? I'd like to withdraw a portion of that fixed income fund. Are you doing some renovations on the house? I smiled, adjusting my pearl necklace. The house is already perfect, son. The renovation now is on my soul. I'm going on a trip. How wonderful. Visiting relatives? God forbid, I laughed. Relatives are best in picture frames. I'm going to a resort in the Florida Keys, all inclusive. I plan to spend a week lying on a lounge chair looking at the ocean. And the only difficult decision I want to make is whether to drink coconut water or a piña colada. Alone? He asked, surprised. Alone? No, with myself. And I assure you, it's the best company I've had in 72 years. I left the bank with the lightness of a young girl. I stopped at a travel agency and bought the package, first class because I deserved it. Before heading home, I stopped at the local hardware store. I bought a can of blue paint, a deep ocean blue. When I got home, I called Jake, who was now my official and trusted handyman. Jake, I want to paint the front gate. What color, Mrs. Dorothy? This blue here. It's beautiful. It'll stand out on the street. It's meant to stand out. I want everyone to know that a woman who isn't afraid of storms lives here. While he painted, I sat on the porch with my tea. Carol appeared at her window, of course. Changing the look of the place, neighbor? Changing the energy, Carol. Gray is sad. Blue is life. And Robert. She couldn't help herself. Curiosity was stronger than friendship. Robert is where he needs to be, growing up. Who knows, maybe in a few years, if he becomes a real man, I'll invite him over for coffee by this blue gate. But the key? Oh, the key is staying in my pocket. The afternoon faded gently. The gate looked beautiful, gleaming under the setting sun. I went inside, locked the door with my customary 2 turns, but without the fear of before. I went to my office. The black notebook was on the desk. I opened it to the last page where I had written, "Rebuild Dorothy." Below that phrase, I wrote a new one with the firm hand of someone who had signed thousands of important documents, but none as important as this treaty of peace with her own conscience. Case closed, sentence served. The plaintiff is now free and unencumbered to pursue happiness. I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer. Tomorrow, I had to pack. The keys were waiting for me, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried if someone else had food on their plate or clean clothes to wear. I looked at the phone. I could call Robert. I could tell him I received his letter, but I decided not to. Silence is also an answer. And for now, silence was the best lesson I could give. I would let him feel the loss. I would let him value the absence. I turned off the living room lights. The dark didn't scare me anymore. I lay down in my bed, straightened the fragrant sheets, and closed my eyes. The sound of the city outside was like a lullaby. I remembered the lipstick on the mirror, the pain, the cold floor. It seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. That victimized Dorothy was in the past, along with the stolen furniture. The Dorothy of now slept peacefully, because she knew that if she woke up and saw any insolent message on the mirror, she wouldn't cry for 5 minutes. She would laugh, and then she would show the world that you don't mess with an old woman, and that mothers also retire from sainthood to assume their rightful place as queens of their own castles. And so I fell asleep, dreaming of the Florida sea and the sweet taste of freedom, won through law and courage. The end.